Before we get into your survey, which is very telling, there's so much more concern about where Hong Kong is and where it's going. As you look at where Hong Kong is now, how does it feel to you? Has this inflicted permanent damage, do you think, on Hong Kong, or is this something that can be changed?
Well, the longer that these protests continue on, the more the chance of permanent damage there is. On a day-to-day basis, in terms of getting work done, in terms of commuting to work, such as today, it's possible to keep going. But these images and some of the disruptions that we see occurring week after week, day after day, really start to seep into the bones of everyone who's here in Hong Kong. And the worst part is we just don't see a solution in sight. So there's a feeling that this is never ending right now, and that's also starting to weigh a lot on people here.
You know, in one of the stories I read ahead of this about the survey, which has been so widely viewed, of course, it's very significant to see so much deterioration so quickly. An economist in Hong Kong at a research institute is quoted saying that a lot of this can be laid at the doorstep of Carrie Lam and her decision to go ahead with that extradition bill, which she has since tabled. Is that a view shared by the business community?
Well, the business community here is really large, but as far as AmCham goes, we were very vocal in being against the extradition bill. We recognized that it would be very troublesome for Hong Kong. So obviously, we weren't happy to see the protests. We were happy to see the bill shelved. But the extradition bill was also really the straw that broke the camel's back, and that in the sense that there had been so much concern, so much unhappiness weighing underneath the surface in Hong Kong. It was the last straw. And now it's very hard to put that back into the bottle because people have started to vocalize. There's no sense of anyone coming in to provide leadership or to provide a sense of direction for the young people in Hong Kong, or at least to talk to people in the streets. So until we see some sort of dialogue, some sort of meeting of the ways, it's very difficult to see how this is going to end.
Yeah, it really does seem that sort of intractability is the biggest concern, right? One of the numbers that jumped out at me of that study, almost half of the respondents are worried about the long-term prospects for Hong Kong. So it's not just concern about, a short-term dip in economic activity. It's not just a concern about the logistics of the city being affected. At what point, or have you already started seeing indications that there are people thinking about maybe, taking their investment away from Hong Kong, looking at other Asian hubs like Singapore instead for stability?
That's right. It is disappointing to see people think that the long-term prospects are being damaged. But I do want to say that on the positive side, Hong Kong is quite special, and it's very hard to just carbon copy a business that people have in Hong Kong somewhere else, such as Singapore. People would like to see Hong Kong succeed. Its geographical location, its efficiency, its connectivity are all points that people who live here and work here really appreciate. But yes, underneath the surface, there are so many pain points, from increased security risks to anxiety among staff to worries about families in the long term, that people are putting backup plans in place. They're not talking about them so openly because they want to see how things progress. And of course, on the other side of all of this, you don't just pick up a huge business and move lock, stock, and barrel over the space of a couple of months. Some of the major headquarters here have as many as 1,000 staff based in Hong Kong. So it will take time to see the real effect, at how many people will leave, whether people will actually downsize their headquarters. It's just too early for people to cut and run, so to speak. There's too much at risk in losing Hong Kong as a hub.
I can understand that. How much of a concern is the navigation of political sensitivities from a corporate perspective? I'm looking at, obviously, the big headline case of what the NBA and the debacle that they've found themselves in. Is that something that businesses are really keenly aware of in terms of whether they put their political allegiances or their beliefs or their values out there and fear the repercussions?
Very keenly aware. It's very difficult for companies now to navigate in this type of environment. And of course, Hong Kong is a place where there's free flow of information and free press, and people are used to expressing themselves here. But now people feel sort of caught in between a rock and a hard place. It's almost easier to keep quiet, which is disappointing in a city that is really known for its dynamism and East meets West. But it is difficult times, and it's not just Hong Kong, it's also the greater U.S.-China trade friction. That puts a lot of pressure on companies. Many companies started years ago operating in China, building their markets in China, their networks in China. Nobody wants to ruin that straight away. So it's a hard navigation. And of course, this could continue to go on for some time until we see some sort of conclusion, both to protests, but the wider U.S.-China trade friction.